Welcome back to the Banking on Digital Growth podcast. I'm J.R. Lay, and I want to ask you a question. Think about your website at your bank or credit union for a moment. Do you have a website that sells, or is your website nothing more than a glorified online brochure? I ask you this question because Derek Krause and I are going to be diving into a very timely topic that we've been thinking about, we've been writing about, we've been speaking about for well over a decade now. And together, we're going to help answer the question, how much should I budget for my bank website, for my credit union's website? Because here's the thing. We're not just talking about budgeting for the build. What we're really talking about today is budgeting beyond the build. This conversation is a conversation that's more than just about dollars and cents. It's about shifting mindsets, because in an age where exponential change is reshaping consumer behavior and technology is accelerating faster and faster, and it's not just reshaping consumer behavior, it's also reshaping the competition, building another glorified online brochure simply will not cut it in the age of AI. In fact, it might cost you everything you have. This is why your website can no longer be viewed as just another strategic checklist project. Instead, it must become your number one marketing and sales channel. It must become your digital growth engine. But first, if you want to find out how your website is doing, how it's performing, if it is built to sell, text me, 832-240-1922. That's because my friends over at Metrify have a free website benchmark assessment that will help you see where you can capture more loans and deposits. Derek, it's that time. It's that time. Let's talk about money. Let's talk about money, but from the sense of budgeting, and budgeting, building a website. Because even it is funny because you sent me an article this week from 2016. CU Times. You and I were both quoted in this article. And I went back and I read this, like, I'm still kind of talking about the same exact things 9 years later. You're still talking about the same thing 9 years later. And I'm hoping that this conversation today gives those that are watching and listening perhaps a new perspective, or reinforces something that they might have been thinking but they haven't taken action on when it comes to budgeting to build a website. And I want to start there. Like, what are we building when we say the word website? Because I see there's three things. Are we building a glorified online brochure? Are we building a website that sells? Or are we building a digital growth engine? And a website that sells integrates into the digital growth engine as a much bigger strategic focus. But let's roll this back. When we say the word websites, building a websites, because this is what you've been doing. This is your area of expertise and focus. What do you see? What does that word mean when you have conversations with prospects?
Yeah, that's a good question to start on, because a lot of times when I start those conversations, I like to ask a question. When you get this new website that you're thinking about, at the end of the day, what do you want it to do for you? What's the measurable outcome? What's the result that you want from it? And most of the time, the answer to that question is that they want more loans and deposits coming through the website. But there is a misconception out there, and it's a misconception that changes how people think about their website in a little bit of the wrong way. And the misconception is that most credit unions and banks think that the majority of people coming to their website are existing members or existing customers. I'll hear things like, well, we want to get more loans and deposits, but 80% of the people coming to our website are just people coming to log into online banking. And that's actually not true at all. I'm not quite sure where the myth comes from, but I published an article a little bit ago with CU Insight where I laid out the data for that. And every single website that I've ever looked at, where if you go to the Google Analytics and look at returning users versus new users, it is overwhelmingly more new users coming to the website than it is returning users. And so, translation, a new user is more likely to be a non-member or not a customer of the financial institution, whereas if they are returning, it's more likely that they already have a relationship. So, and that's really important, because when you think about the original question, what's the point of the website? What are we building? What is the website? It's really important to understand that it's your number one marketing asset. It should be the number one place that people are coming to get information about you, and where it should be generating loans and deposits for the financial institution.
Can I build upon your perspective?
Yeah.
So I want to roll back on a point, and perhaps this is where the misconception is, the myth, if you will. I think when you look at the Google Analytics, and it might be that homepage traffic, but I think that's a poor indicator, because when you start looking at we'll call them the product pages, or where the quote unquote the sell happens, as they're diving deeper, that to me is where I think the real gold of prospect behavior is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the percent of the new traffic that you see exponentially greater than quote unquote the returning traffic. The returning traffic, if all you're looking at is the homepage, I think that's a poor indicator of traffic performance. And you're probably going to over index there anyway on returning visits, because their account holders going to log into online banking. But when you get into the actual pages that move the needle, that lead to the loan, that lead to the deposit, that is the real, where the real magic, where the real conversion happens. And the other thing too is to your point, why are we building this? Yes, loans and deposits. But there's another thing too that precedes this. You said this should be your number one marketing channel. It's also, I see it as your number one sales channel, because there are loans, there are deposits, but go up a little bit in that journey, there are leads,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. And there are different types of leads based upon where someone is in a buying journey. So there's some real buyer psychology that I think needs to be applied, not just to the marketing side, for example, like you're doing a lot of that with the A/B testing, but then there's also a sales component too. And when you take marketing and sales and you bring it together, that comes back to my perspective around, this is a growth engine. And in fact, some of the institutions that I've advised over the years, they have taken their website as a performance channel from their most underperforming when compared to their branch, their physical branch locations, to then outperforming all of their physical branch channels combined.
Hmm.
And it begins with a mindset shift.
Yeah. I mean, it really should be outperforming the physical branches, because today, if someone's considering a credit union or bank, like, where are they going to go first? Are most people going to go and stop by a branch first, or are they going to go to your website first to learn about you? Pretty much everyone's going to go to your website first.
We did research on this a few years ago, and we found that 92% of people, when we did the survey with consumers, 92% say they're going to go online and do some sort of a Google search, or be driven from some sort of an ad traffic, because there was already defined, I have a problem, or I'm looking for a solution. So that's how they find their way to the website. And then you're like, well, what about the other 8%? Well, the other 8% said, well, when I have a question, I'm going to go to social media, and I'm going to ask my friends on social media, or I'm going to ask my social media network, or I'm going to go ask a family, a friend in real life in a conversation. But then they said the second stop would then be to go directly visit referred institution's website there. So in essence, we could say 100% of traffic in the decision-making process will eventually find its way through the website, even looking for a branch location, something as tactical as that.
Yeah. And you were talking about when people have a question, and I imagine this survey was probably a few years ago, right? So
Yep.
now people are going to ask AI.
Oh, yes.
Probably first, before they even go and ask a friend or ask on social media, they're going to ask AI the question.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you and I have had a lot of conversations about that. But just the other day, I had a question. It was my mother-in-law found an old phone. It was what was it? It was a Motorola. It was actually a Motorola Razor. It was like a
Oh, really?
version 4, and I was like, oh, I'm curious if I could still connect this to the network. And so I first started. It's crazy because I first went to Google. I didn't even get all the way there. I was going to go to Google and just search it. I was like, wait a minute. I then pulled up the Chat GPT app on my phone, but then I started just talking to it and like having a conversation, and it was talking back. And my sister-in-law, she goes, I didn't know you could do that. I go, oh, I talk more to my Chat GPT app now than I probably will
Oh, do
type
you?
in. Yeah, so it's just an interesting just observing my behavior there.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far off track. I want to come back to website when it comes to our point of the conversation, because it's like, I think getting really clear on what you're building and why you're building it. And that's where it's like you mentioned, yeah, loans and deposits, but I also want to really encourage we're building this to generate leads. We're building this to nurture leads. Like that should be another objective because that then goes into the direct results of loans and deposits. What are the biggest mistakes when it comes to budgeting for websites that you have seen?
Oh, man. And real quick, if you don't mind, I've talked with a lot of people over the years. Well, I'll talk about leads and lead capture, and like someone at the financial institution will ask, oh, "What's a lead?" When you say lead,
Oh,
what do you mean? And so
it's a good point.
when you capture a lead, it's maybe it's usually when someone's not ready to complete a full application. They haven't done that yet, but they've just given you their basic contact information, name, email, phone number,
Hmm.
and so yeah. Now back to your question. What a
Budget
biggest mistakes that people make when they're budgeting for a website. So uh, I'm going to start with one that historically I think is the biggest mistake that they've made. And then I want to talk about a second one that I think is will be a mistake
mm.
if they don't budget for it going into next year and beyond. So
Next year being for the context of recording, this is we're recording in August of 2025. So when you're saying next year, you're saying 2026 and beyond.
yeah, I mean, and honestly, even they really should be start budgeting for it and allocating money toward it now. But for
Mm,
sure, going into this next budgeting season for 2026 and forward. So historically, the biggest mistake that financial institutions make with their websites is that when they're budgeting for them is they only budget for the building of the website. They don't
mm,
budget for what comes after the launch of the website
right.
because so the effect of that is the website redesign, the website rebuild becomes about building the website. And you might be, well, someone might listen to this might say, well, what does he mean? Yeah, of course, budgeting for the redesign is about redesigning the website. Well, that's the activity is redesigning the website. That's the, doing the development, going through the process, but that's not the end result that you want. The end
Mm,
result you want is, like you said, you want it to be a growth tool. You want it to generate leads, which ultimately you want to turn into loans and deposits for the institution. And
yeah.
so the problem is if you put all of your emphasis on just the one time project, then what happens is you build the website, you launch it, and then no result gets measured afterward. You don't, most credit unions and banks have no idea how many loans and deposits their website is actually generating. They may know, they may have some analytics from a loan origination and account opening system to see how many applications they're getting. They can know that, but they don't know how many of those are coming from the website and from which pages and products on the website. They don't really know the performance of their website and if it's doing a good job or not. So the mistake is only thinking about the redesign of the site, not thinking about the ongoing tracking and optimization on an ongoing basis long term.
I love this conversation because these are things that I've been thinking about literally for 23 years of my life. I mean, I spent 10 years building websites for financial institutions before moving into advising, and not just on the website, but that bigger digital growth engine and how that fits into the different areas of the organization. I've never thought about this, but I'm curious what you could do with this and how this would resonate with others. The opportunity here, because like we're talking about the challenge, but the opportunity, budget beyond the build.
Mm-hmm.
You got to beyond the build
Exactly.
of that. And that budget beyond the build, like I think about when you do a budget, well, you've got your build budget,
Mm-hmm.
then you have the budget beyond the build allocated for the next 12, 24, 36 months. And I think perhaps, and I'd love to get your take on this, is that the reason that institutions don't budget beyond the build? Because they look at this maybe subconsciously as it's another quote unquote project. So we put this on the strategic agenda. We're going to build this thing this year and check that off the list. And then we're going to go to the next thing. Very similar to how they build a physical branch. So
Mm.
you go, we're going to build a branch. So we're going to do site analysis. Then we're going to get the design, work with the architectures, and it might be a design build firm. So we'll have the architects and the contractors all in one. And then we do the ribbon cutting, and then we're done. Like that branch is completely finished. And so if you think about and I've used this, I'm guilty. This is your digital branch. Well, if you call it your digital branch and you're playing with that branch mindset, you build a branch, you're done with the branch, and that's it. This perspective you're bringing about budgeting beyond the build is thinking from a different context, which comes back to my point before. It's like when you ask the question, well, what are you building? What do you want to build when it comes to your website? Is it a glorified online brochure? Is it a website that sells, i.e. retail, e-commerce, or is it a digital growth engine? So where does that show up? And, the reason we don't budget beyond the build, when you have that, when you bring those conversations up, what type of feedback do you get? Is it positive? Is it pushback? Is it, oh, we never thought about that before?
Yeah, the feedback is generally, we haven't done that before, but it makes sense. So
Mm.
when I have these conversations, and I usually start these conversations by using our own tool that we've built in Metrify that we call Opportunity and Intelligence. It's an analytics system where we set up all of their conversion funnels. We set up how much in assets, how much in dollars they're getting through each funnel. We benchmark them against other financial institutions to see if their funnel's performing above average, below average, and so on. And when people see that, and they see that most of the time they're leaving millions of dollars on the table every year because their website isn't converting. And that's even for smaller credit unions. Bigger credit unions, it's often tens of millions, sometimes even hundreds of millions, because their website isn't converting, but they don't know that because they've never actually tracked their conversion funnels. They've never benchmarked them against other financial institutions to know that they have some important funnels that are converting below average. So when they actually see that, that's what really helps people start to understand that it has to be more than just this one-time project. It has to be an ongoing emphasis of optimization, because that's how you actually get loans and deposits through the website. You've got to measure, figure out where the problems are, like pinpoint those points where conversion is low, run A/B tests to improve that section of the funnel, and then on repeat. And when once So you asked, how do people receive that when I talk about it? Well, once they understand the context and they see how their website's currently performing and they know how it could be performing, it's usually an aha moment. And then they understand, like, okay, that makes sense, but we've never seen this approach before. And I think going back to what you're talking about, like, why aren't they doing that? I think the disconnect is they've never measured the actual performance of their site before. The measurement has been, do we like it? Do we think it looks good? Do our
Mm.
members say that they like it? Do we hear like positive feedback? And there hasn't been, if it's been treated more like an art project or just purely a branding type project. And so they go through every 5 years they do this rebuild and is treated just like a cost rather than an investment that actually generates assets for the financial institution. And I think that's where the disconnect is not having measurement. And once they see measurement, that 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 usually changes their perspective.
I really like the opportunity intelligence. It comes back to providing a different perspective, an objective perspective, a quantifiable perspective. And I think the other thing too, when it comes to budgets, I'm going to come back to the branch for a bit. And as you were talking, I was going back and pulling up some data from research I've done over the years. And this is a NASDAQ article, and it's reported that to build, and this does not include the cost of land, so there's then not real estate. Just to build a full service branch, the average cost is around $1 to $1.5 million, excluding the physical land. And then to staff that branch with 6 full-time employees, you got another annual operating cost to run the thing is about another $1 million, 800,000, another $1 million. Pause for a moment. And let's cross-reference this with a study from Peak Performance Consulting. And one of the things that Peak Performance Consulting found is that just slightly more, i.e. 52%, more than half, slightly more than half, 52% of all branches of the baking industry are achieving acceptable levels of profitability. Over one quarter, 28% are below break even, and the remainder are contributing at least contributing to overhead, even if they're not achieving to acceptable ROI. This study now goes on to continue. It says half of branches that are unprofitable today will never cross the break-even threshold. So wow. If you think about the idea, and I want to be very careful of using this because I think the point of our conversation today is to budget beyond the build, number one. But it comes back to what are you building? And if you think about this as a digital growth engine, it's not just a branch anymore. It's not just a digital branch. It's where your future growth, it's where your fruit will be born. And if you're going to do that in the physical world, you're looking at an outlay of $2.5 million for year one, and then another $1 million year after that. But looking at the peak performance study, half of the unprofitable branches today will never be profitable. So, we've talked about this a lot in our previous conversations.
Yeah,
but belief, mindset, perspective, and that shift is I think. When you think about the age of AI, what might be some of the budgeting mistakes there when it comes to what we've thought about building? Maybe we've thought about building a website that sells. Maybe we've thought about this as a growth engine. But now we've got AI entering into the picture. Mm-hmm. Where might we be missing the mark to get ahead of what some of the budget gaps could be when it comes to building a website in the age of AI?
Yeah, and I'm glad that's perfect segue because I said earlier there are two things I want to talk about. The historical one, which is you got to budget beyond the build, and that's still true today. You got to keep doing that even though things are changing with AI. If you're not making an effort to convert your human visitors that are coming to the website, you're not going to be in a good position to convert the AI agents that are now using your website. So that's the second thing I wanted to talk about, because going into the future now, I just alluded to it. That's exactly what's happening. It's not just humans that are visiting websites anymore. It's AI agents. And since ChatGPT has exploded onto the scene the last few years, that's been happening now, where AI agents are coming to your site or not coming to your site. They're going to some sites out there and getting information and bringing it back to their users. But now what we're seeing is it's going beyond. AI's abilities are going beyond just getting information, and it's turning into AI can actually take actions on behalf of users. So I think we've talked about in the past with Perplexity's Shop Like a Pro feature. Now on Perplexity, you can search for a product and purchase it without ever leaving Perplexity. You don't have to go to a different website to purchase that product. You do it all within Perplexity. Or in last episode or the episode before, we talked about ChatGPT's new feature of agent mode, which opens the ability for ChatGPT to take actions on your behalf because it can use a website like a human. So what's the implication for budgeting? Well, AI is it's the fastest adopted technology ever. And when you think about speed, like the speed of change that's happening, financial institutions are not the speediest creatures, are traditionally slow to react to things. But this is a case where the world is changing very quickly around financial institutions because of what's happening with AI. So if financial institutions don't budget going into next year for adjusting their strategy to what's happening with AI, they could very quickly, very easily get behind in a way that would be hard for them to catch up if they don't start doing something now. And more, I want to get into more specifics of what I think they actually need to do there. But one thing that I'll just put out there now, and I know we've talked about this a little bit, is SEMrush put out a study where they found they're projecting based on current usage that AI search, so people going to ChatGPT or Perplexity or et cetera, to search for things instead of going to Google search, AI search is on trend to overtake Google search in the next 2.5 years, by 2028 or sooner. So that means big change for marketing.
Well, you and I were talking before we hit the record button, but Jean Tanner, another entrepreneur out in your neck of the woods, she's a real estate agent. And I was talking with her, and she has, within the past few months, secured 4 listings. And those listings came through AI search. And I think, you're like, well, we're talking FIs, banks, credit unions here. Well, real estate closely aligns with mortgage, one of the most profitable products in a loan portfolio. And so if we're starting to see this, and you're right, and I've written about this in Banking on Digital Growth, I've written about this in Banking on Change, exponential shifts in technology and exponential leaps in technology are leading to exponential leaps in the competitive landscape. But I think the unknown variable here is the exponential leaps and transformations of consumer behavior. I think that's the thing. And this is, I think when it comes to budgeting now, to not just build a website that sells, but really build a digital growth engine to budget beyond the build. One of the most important questions you could ask and get alignment on is where will our growth come from over the next 12, 24, 36 months. Where will that growth come from? What is the belief that you're operating on today to answer that question? And if you don't know, it's okay. I think that's why you and I are having these conversations, to provide a perspective that helps to shift a belief so that they begin to see, think, feel, and then can make a different decision that doesn't, and we talked about this in a previous conversation too, to where they just don't survive, but they can thrive in this age of AI. And as we start to wrap up on the budget side, because we could probably keep unpacking this, what are the most important things to consider? If you were sitting down with a community bank or credit union and they are thinking about their budget, to budget beyond the build, what would be the most important considerations that you would advise and walk and guide them through?
Yeah, two things. First, when it comes to budgeting beyond the build, I'd say A/B testing. So, and we've talked a little bit about A/B testing, and at some point we should probably talk in more depth about what A/B testing really looks like. But essentially, the whole process of A/B testing incorporates mapping out your analytics for your website, your conversion funnels, pinpointing where you're leaving money on the table, where you're performing below average, and then when you take that particular part of the user experience and you try to understand, why isn't this step of the funnel converting the way it should be? You design an alternative experience, you launch that on the website, and you run them both at the same time, and you measure which one provides a better conversion rate, and then you leave that one as, you make that the default experience. Doing that on an ongoing basis, we've seen repeatedly that leads to more loans and accounts for financial institutions.
Can I pause you on that? When you say A/B testing, because I don't know, this beyond the build is really just, I think, an alliteration. So it's, and maybe I'm just in love with my own idea at this point, and that's okay. It's easy for me to remember. I was like, yeah, we got to think beyond the build.
Yeah, no, it's a great alliteration.
Is A/B testing, is that something that you recommend before the build or beyond the build, or both?
So it has applications for during the build of the website and after. So you can only run an A/B test on a live website. So if you've got you're working on a development site or a prototype site that doesn't have real human traffic coming to it, you can't run an A/B test on it.
I just didn't know if you would recommend, for example, let's use building a physical branch as an analogy here. I mentioned before, one of the steps is you go out and you do the site analysis. You look at traffic flow to make sure that you're putting on the right piece of land. I'm thinking about A/B testing before the build as part of that quote unquote site analysis for the present day state.
Oh, I see.
That as benchmark of, okay, this is where we're at today. We're going to take all of that information, and we're going to then apply that. So that's before the build, if you will, A/B testing before the build, and then we're going to apply that through the build, and then we're going to continue beyond the build.
Yeah. I would absolutely advocate for not waiting until you have a new website to start A/B testing. Everyone should start doing A/B testing right now, because that's really the only way. And I say that again, I'll emphasize that it's the only way to actually know what causes conversion and what doesn't.
And I'm so glad you're saying that, because I can think about when we used to build websites, that was the most frustrating thing. We didn't know if what we were doing was making a difference, because they didn't have any performance benchmarks. And so when I would make the recommendations, well, let's just before we even think about designing quote unquote anything, let's just get a benchmark of where we're at today performance wise, So then, 90 days after launch, 180 days after launch, we can look back and measure progress. But the data didn't exist. And so you're right. If you're able to get a benchmark before the build, you can apply insights during the build and then continue to optimize for loans, for deposits, for leads beyond the build.
Yeah. And so you can only run an A/B test on a live site, but when you're building the site, any insights that you've got from beforehand, you can apply. And like we have a library of over 100 A/B tests that we've already run with financial institutions. There's a wealth there of insights that we take and apply to the initial build of the website. We'll say, okay, for your auto loan page, these are all the insights that we've learned from 100 A/B tests. Some of those apply to auto loans. So this is the best way that we know today of how to build an auto loan page. And then you launch it, you measure its performance, and then you continue to test new iterations of it over time, and it gets better and better that way. So you want to take all the insights that you have to get you to the best starting point, and then continue to iterate and enhance on an ongoing basis.
I think that's an important point. I mean, when you say you have, hundreds of data points of perspective from running previous A/B tests for different institutions, you are pattern matching at scale of what works and what doesn't work. And the reason I bring this up is I think about when we used to build websites, man. One of the most frustrating things was when we would get some internal key stakeholder who was over a product line saying, I want this and I want this. And I was like, I don't really care what you want. Your opinion doesn't matter. And I know this comes off harsh, but like at this point, it's like, it is what it is, because your opinion really doesn't matter. You're not the one buying your product. Members who have no affinity, particularly if they're not a member or a customer, if they have no affinity to the brand, then I will keep this PG. I've been thinking about this term. No one really cares. It's like we have so much going on in our lives that what we're working on, we think is the most important thing. We think that project is the most important thing. But that's our perspective. And so that's where I think when you're bringing in this library of insights, of optimization intelligence from the past, that's an acceleration for others, so that you're eliminating all the guesswork and you're taking out some of the potential for conflict of what, well, Sally wants this and David wants that. And hey, here's what the market's saying.
Yeah, you're speaking to exactly why we rebranded to Metrify. That was like, if you go to our website now and go to our About Us page, it at the top it says we seek the truth, and you go and look at our values, and it's about truth over opinions, and it says like there are lots of opinions, but not all opinions are correct, and it's from that exact experience, and that's what drove us toward research in the first place. Is we went through a couple years of having all these conversations where it was just a battle of opinions, and we were even expressing opinions that we just believed them. We didn't have any evidence behind them, and eventually we were like, oh, this is so wrong. Like it has at some point it has to come back to data and research, and that's what drove us toward A/B testing in the first place.
That echoes. So we haven't really talked about this much, but I mean, the whole reason that you and I are having these conversations is because I launched another brand about 6 months ago, Level Up Business, to help other B2B entrepreneurs turn video content into books so that they can monetize their wisdom. And one of our 7 virtues is, instead of seek the truth, it's to tell the truth.
Okay,
and it's to tell the truth, to be radically honest. We say, be radically honest and transparent, but don't take things personally. And because this isn't about, it's about, because one of our other virtues is to pursue excellence. And if you want to pursue excellence, you got to be willing to tell the truth and hear the truth too. And I like how you're adding in, we're here to seek the truth. And that's coming back to this. So coming back to your budget recommendations,
Yeah.
A/B test.
A/B testing, and you got to start working on. Secondly, you got to start working on generative engine optimization. So that's the term that people are using now for showing up in AI results. So for years, it's been about search engine optimization showing up in Google results, and that's still important today. That is still important. So I'm not saying that SEO is not important anymore, but if you're not also thinking about generative engine optimization, geo, how often your brand is showing up in ChatGPT responses, or even the Google AI overviews, or now Google's got an AI mode that they've released. So
Yep.
yeah, so if you're in from studies that I've seen, there's some studies that show that if you're ranking well in search engine results, then you may be doing okay in AI results. But I've also seen studies to the contrary of that show that most of the results that are showing up in a chat GPT response and most other LLMs and LLM, that's large language model like ChatGPT, Perplexity. Most of the results that they're surfacing are ranking low on Google, like page 3 or lower. So just being at the top of the Google search results doesn't mean that you're going to show up in AI results. And if just with how rapidly AI is being adopted and people are turning to these AI tools and starting to go less to Google search, if you're not giving thought to how you're showing up or not showing up in AI responses, you could very easily get left behind. If you go from now through the end of 2026, it's not until 2027 that you're going to do anything about it. It'd just be so easy to get left behind on that front.
There's one more thought that I have before we wrap, and it's what's informing your budget decision. Like, where are you drawing these conclusions? Sometimes it might be, well, we built a website 5 years ago. Once again, we did studies on this, and I want to say that the average FI website back then was between 4 to 5 years old. And it was on the model of we build it when we don't touch it for another 4 to 5 years. That was the average. They weren't doing continuous optimization, or what I read about in Banking on Digital Growth driven design. They weren't budgeting beyond the build. But what's informing that? And I bring this up because it's almost like, is it the blind leading the blind? Are we operating upon a past construct? So for example, let's say, 3-5 years ago, we budgeted $50,000 for the website, but we didn't budget beyond the build. And so, we're going to add an additional $10,000. We're just going to pull. We're just going to make. We're pretty much just making stuff up to pull together a budget. And the reason I'm thinking about this is, my wife and I have been working for about 4 or 5 years on building a home. And you're like, that's a long time. Like, it is a long time, because we worked with an architect. It was about 1.5 years, 18 months to draw up plans, extremely detailed plans. And then we went to shop some builders, and that's probably had taken the longest time. And because we've learned a lot. It's like different builders think differently. One builder, though, charged a fee just to review the plans and bid the project. And I really appreciated that. We paid the fee, but he gave us by far the best, most transparent breakdown of anyone that we had talked to. So I'm curious, if you're thinking about this, where might some sort of, we'll call it a diagnostic discovery, just to get some perspective on what to begin to budget to begin with in the first place, if we are wanting to go beyond building another glorified online brochure to build a website that sells, to build what is going to become your digital growth engine, to budget beyond the build for continuous optimization, to think about things like geo and an AI search. It's just something I'm thinking about right now
Yeah.
from my experience of building a physical house.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question because rather than just picking an arbitrary number, what should you be basing it on? And as you ask that question, I think it comes back to, well, how much money is your website generating and how much money could it be generating? And
Yeah.
if there's a ton of potential there, then
Mhm.
you should be investing more money in it, right? Because then the ROI is there. And that wasn't our original, like when we built the opportunity intelligence for Metrify, we we didn't build it as a budgeting, like a budget justification tool. We built it for our A/B testing purposes,
Yeah.
but as we've put credit unions and banks onto the platform, set them up with those funnels, attach dollar amounts to the funnels and generated totals so they can see this is the total amount of assets being generated by your website right now, and this is what your potential is. We have had some that have actually used that as part of their budget justification. So a marketing department will see that and they say, "Oh, okay, we've been wanting to build a new website, but part of the challenge is going back to the leadership team where we've talked about this as well on past episodes where there's sometimes a disconnect where the leaders like the CFO or the CEO are finance. They're
Hmm.
finance people. They come from a finance background, and the marketing people, it's more of a creative, artistic, and so that it can be hard for them sometimes to justify the budget to get the website that they need because they don't have the numbers to prove the value of building the new website. So uh, being able to being able to see how much money your website is generating and how much money it could generate in loans and deposits, and that's what we can do in Metrify. That's that can be a really valuable tool for seeing how much money you should be spending and justifying it.
So I think in models and frameworks, and I want to take our entire conversation and wrap up on this. And I like how it's like we're bringing different perspectives, you and I, and we're coming and perhaps even drawing a new conclusion, a new framework. If I think about not building a glorified online brochure, but building a website that sells, building a digital growth engine that increases loans, it increases deposits, it generates leads, it nurtures leads, and all of that leads into conversions. There's really, if you think about the budget, I see it kind of like three big chunks of the budget. I see before the build, small percentage diagnostic discovery benchmarking, very similar to if you're doing site analysis for building a physical branch.
Mm.
So that's before the build. During the build, and then beyond the build. It's like before, during, and beyond. And you break your budget down into those three big chunks.
Yeah, I like it.
I think that would really provide a path forward to ensure that you're not doing what you've always done and you have clarity into performance, you have clarity into growth, you have clarity into progress.
Yeah, I love that approach. Before, during, after. I think that's smart.
So that's your activity. If you're watching or listening, you got this far. Before before the build, during the build, beyond the build.
Yeah,
Look at your budget.
yeah. And if you want to see that analysis from Metrify with see your conversion funnels, see how much money they're generating, compare them with other financial institutions, and help that for the sake of budgeting. And that's a kickstart in what you should be doing afterward as well with A/B testing. If you want to see that, text me 661-979-9395. Or another tool we've talked about. So we talked about A/B testing. We also talked about generative engine optimization, GEO. And in the last episode or two, we talked about our AI visibility tool that we built that shows how often your brand is showing up in AI search results. Both of those tools, the Metrify Opportunity Intelligence and the AI Visibility, we call it Paralume. Those are both diagnostic tools that can tell you where you sit today. So when you think about before, during, and after, we use those before with financial institutions, and there are applications during and there are applications after. But those would be a really good way to start, is to find out where you sit today from a conversion and AI visibility perspective. So yeah, shoot me a text.
Hey, it's JR, and I just wanted to thank you once again for tuning into today's podcast conversation with Derek. My question, if you've listened to this far, what are you going to do next? You're going to go, you're going to take action, or you're going to do nothing? If you want to take some action, I want to make it very easy for you. Send me a text right now, 832-240-1922. That's because my friends over at Metrify, they have a free website benchmark assessment that will make it easy for you to see where you can capture more loans, more deposits, transform a glorified online brochure into a website that sells.